Imagine that the flaw in the world did not begin with evil, not with a rebellion, not with a dark power rising up against the light, not with a serpent or a sin or a war in heaven. Imagine that the crack running through everything, the reason the world is so beautiful and so broken at once, the reason the innocent suffer and the good things fade and nothing here quite lasts. Imagine that all of it began with a mistake, a single mistake made not out of malice, but out of love, out of longing, out of a desire that reached too far, too fast, and brought into being something that should never have existed. And imagine that the one who made the mistake was not a villain. She was the wisest of all. She was called wisdom itself. She was one of the highest beings in the fullness of the light, and what she wanted was not power and not rebellion, but simply to know the deepest source of everything, to reach all the way back to the origin she came from, and in reaching for it, alone, without waiting, without her other half, she brought forth a thing that fell out of the light and became a god who did not know he was not God. And that God built this world. This is the story the ancient Gnostics told about how a flawed world was born, and at the centre of it is not a devil, it is a grieving mother. Her name was Sophia. This is not a metaphor I am inventing to carry you towards sleep. This is written down. It is told in different forms across the oldest Gnostic scriptures that survive, the secret book of John, buried in a jar in the sands of Egypt and not read again for 16 centuries, the accounts of the great teacher Valentinus and those who followed him, texts with names like the hypostasis of the archons and on the origin of the world, and in all of them, in one form or another, stands this astonishing idea that the world was not made by a perfect God, and it was not made by an evil one, but by a lesser power, born from a mistake, made by the highest wisdom when her longing outran her. The Gnostics looked at the brokenness of the world and did not blame you for it, and did not quite blame a devil for it. They traced it back to a fall inside the light itself, a fall born of love. Tonight, we are going to tell that story in full, slowly, all the way to the end. We are going to go up, first, to the fullness before the mistake, to the unknowable source, and the ordered light that poured out from it, and the beings of that light. We are going to meet Sophia, and understand who she was, and what she longed for, and why. We are going to watch gently the moment the mistake was made, and see that it was not wickedness, but reaching. We are going to see what came out of that reaching, the misshapen power, the blind God, who took the light he had stolen and built a world and called himself the only God. We are going to hear the voice that corrected him. And then we are going to follow the part of the story almost everyone forgets, Sophia's grief, and her repentance, and her rescue, and the promise that her mistake would, in the end, be undone. So stay with me all the way to the end, because the final revelation of Sophia's story is not that a flawed world was born from a mistake. The title tells you that much already. The final revelation is that Sophia is not only a figure in an ancient myth, she is a mirror. Her longing is your longing. Her reaching is your reaching. Her fall and her grief and her long journey back toward the light. The Gnostics believed that story is being told again, quietly, in you, right now, and that how it ends in you is not yet decided. If this kind of hidden knowledge speaks to something in you, take a moment now to subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. And if you want to go deeper than a single video can go, everything I have gathered on these lost texts is waiting for you in the Hidden Light collection. The link is below. Now let us begin. Before we tell Sophia's story, we have to feel the question it was answering, because it is the oldest and hardest question there is, and every religion that has ever existed has had to wrestle with it. The question is this: if there is a good and all-powerful source behind everything, then why is the world like this? Why is it so full of suffering? Why do children die? Why does every living thing survive only by consuming other living things? Why is there disease, and decay, and loss, and cruelty woven right into the fabric of existence? Why, if the world was made by perfect goodness, is it so obviously, so painfully, not perfect? Thinkers have a name for this question. They call it the problem of evil. And it is not an abstract puzzle. It is the ache under every prayer ever whispered in a hospital, every cry of why did this happen, every moment a human being has looked at the wrongness of the world and felt that it could not be the way things were meant to be. Most traditions answer this question in one of a few ways. Some say the suffering is a punishment, or a test, or a mystery we are not meant to understand, that behind the apparent wrongness there is a hidden justice we cannot see. Some say the evil comes from human choice, that a good world was spoiled by human sin. Some say there is a dark power, a devil, an adversary, who corrupts what the good God made. Each of these answers has comforted people, and each has troubled them, because each leaves something unresolved. If it is all secretly just, why does it feel so unjust? If it is all our fault, why is the natural world itself so red in tooth and claw, long before any human chose anything? And if there is a devil, where did he come from, and why does a good and all-powerful God permit him? The Gnostics looked at all of these answers and found them wanting, and they gave a different one, stranger and darker, and in a certain way more merciful than any of them. They said, the reason the world is flawed is that the world was not made by the perfect source at all. The highest God, the true fullness, did not make this world. This world was made by a lesser being, a flawed being, one who was himself the product of a mistake made higher up. The flaw in the world is real, they said. You are not imagining it. It is not secretly perfect. It is genuinely broken, because the one who made it was not the perfect one, but a lower power born of a fall. Sit with how much this reframes everything. It means your instinct that something is wrong with the world is not a failure of faith or a lack of gratitude. It is accurate. It means you do not have to twist yourself into believing that every horror is secretly a gift. And it means the true source, the real and perfect fullness, is not responsible for the horrors, is in fact entirely beyond this flawed world, uncontaminated by it, and reaching down into it to rescue what is trapped here. This is the answer Sophia's story gives to the oldest question. The world is flawed because it was born flawed from a mistake made by wisdom herself in the fullness of the light. And notice one more thing about this answer before we go up into the story, because it is what makes it not only clever but consoling. Most answers to the problem of evil ask you to change how you feel about the suffering, to accept it, to trust that it is secretly just, to believe it is deserved or purposeful. They ask you to make peace with the wrongness by deciding it is not really wrong. The Gnostic answer does the opposite. It lets the wrongness be wrong. It does not ask you to pretend the suffering is fine, or fair, or secretly good. It says, your horror at the suffering is correct, the world really is not as it should be, you are not failing to understand some hidden justice. And then it does something the other answers cannot. It clears the true source of any blame for it. placing the flaw not in the perfect light, but in a lower and fallen making, so that you can go on trusting that the ultimate reality, the source, the deepest ground of things, is wholly good, wholly light, entirely uncontaminated by the horror, and actively reaching down to rescue what is trapped in it. You do not have to choose between honesty about the world's brokenness and trust in the goodness at the heart of things. The Gnostic answer lets you have both, the honesty and the trust, by placing the brokenness where it belongs and keeping the light clean. That is a rare and precious combination, and it is why this ancient answer still speaks to people who cannot accept that the horrors of the world are secretly fine. To understand how such a thing could happen, we have to go up first, all the way up, above the mistake, above the world, to the source, before anything went wrong, before the world, before Sophia's mistake, before anything at all that we would call a thing. There was the source. And the Gnostics, when they tried to describe it, did something remarkable and revealing. They mostly described what it is not. They called it the invisible spirit, the monad, the one, the ineffable, the unnameable, the depth. And in the secret book of John there is a long, almost dizzying passage in which the text tries to speak of this source and keeps having to take back its own words. It is not corporeal, it says, and it is not incorporeal. It is not large, and it is not small. It is not a quantity you could measure, not a quality you could name. It is not a god among gods, because it is beyond the category of gods. It does not exist, the text dares to say, in the way that anything else exists, because it is the source of existence itself, and therefore cannot be contained in the word. Every time the text reaches for a description, it pulls back, because any description would make the source smaller than it is, would turn the infinite into one more finite thing among things. Sit with that, because it is important, and it is beautiful, and it will matter for everything that follows. The Gnostics believed the true source is utterly beyond comprehension, not merely very great, not merely very far away, but genuinely beyond every concept the mind can form. It is not an old man on a throne. It is not a lawgiver. It is not a ruler who watches and judges. It is a depth of pure being and light and goodness so complete that the mind simply cannot wrap around it, and, crucially, so complete that it lacks nothing, needs nothing, wants for nothing. It is fullness. That is the word they used for the divine world that flows from it. The Pleroma. The fullness. A reality with no emptiness in it, no lack, no absence, no shadow. And out of that fullness, the source did not stay alone. This is the first great movement of the whole story. The source, being infinite goodness and infinite light, overflowed, not out of need, it needed nothing, but out of sheer abundance, the way a spring overflows simply because it is full. And in that overflowing, the divine world came to be. The source contemplated itself, knew itself, and in that self-knowledge there came forth the first of the emanations, a kind of first reflection, a first companion, often given the name Barbelo, sometimes called the first thought of the source, the womb of everything, the image in which the source saw itself. And from that first emanation, more came forth, wave upon wave of living light, each one a being, a radiance, a facet of the infinite. The Gnostics called these beings the Aeons, and it is easy to picture them wrongly, so let us be careful. They are not angels standing around a throne. They are not lesser gods in a pantheon. They are something more like the qualities of the divine itself, made living and personal, the mind of the source, its foreknowledge, its truth, its life, its love, its wisdom, each pouring forth as a distinct being of light, and each joined with a partner, so that the fullness is a harmony of pairs, a great dance of complementary powers, all of them together making up the fullness of what the divine is. This is the world before the mistake, a world of pure light, ordered and whole, in which every being had its place and its partner, and nothing was missing, and nothing was wrong. And I want you to sit with this fullness for a moment longer than the story strictly requires, because the Gnostics believed it is not only the setting of an ancient myth, it is the home your deepest self remembers. Have you ever felt in some quiet or unguarded moment a sudden ache for a wholeness you cannot quite locate, a sense that there is a way things are supposed to be, complete, harmonious, without lack, without loss, without the endless ache of wanting, and that you have known it somewhere, though you cannot say where or when? The Gnostics would say, that is the fullness. That is the memory of the light you fell from. You have never seen it with these eyes, in this life, and yet something in you knows it, the way you might know the feeling of a home you left as a small child, not the details but the atmosphere, the safety, the completeness. The reason no earthly thing has ever fully satisfied you, the reason even your happiest moments carry a faint shadow of longing, is that you are measuring everything, without knowing it, against the fullness. Nothing here is quite whole, because you remember wholeness. Hold that ache as we descend into the story, because that ache is the thread that ties you to Sophia and to the light, and it is the thread that will, in the end, lead home. And it is into this perfect, ordered, harmonious fullness, this dance of paired lights in which nothing had ever gone wrong, that we now have to introduce the one whose reaching would change everything. Because among all these Aeons, these beings of the divine light, there was one whose name was Wisdom. And to understand her mistake, we first have to understand how the fullness was meant to work, and what it meant in that world of pairs to act alone. To understand Sophia's mistake, you have to understand the law of the world she lived in, not a law written down and imposed, but a law woven into the very nature of the fullness, and that law was harmony. Balance, pairing, consent, the Aeons, the beings of light, came forth in pairs. The Gnostics had a word for these pairs, and it means, roughly, a yoking together, a joining. The idea that each Aeon had a counterpart, a partner, and that the two together formed a whole. This was not merely a romantic image. It expressed something the Gnostics believed about the very structure of the divine, that wholeness comes from complement, that the fullness of any quality requires its balancing partner, that nothing in the divine world stood entirely alone. Mind was paired with truth, the word was paired with life, and so on through the whole ordered array. The fullness was not a collection of isolated powers, it was a marriage of them, a great interweaving, in which every being existed in relationship, in balance, in the give and take of its pairing. And there was another principle, just as important. The emanations, the bringing forth of new light, was meant to happen in harmony with the whole, in accord with the source, with consent, with the participation of one's partner, in the proper order. When the Aeons brought forth, they brought forth together, in agreement, in the flow of the whole fullness, and what came forth was therefore in harmony, whole, perfect, belonging. This was how the divine world grew and glorified its source, not through solitary acts of will, but through the harmonious overflow of a whole that moved together. Sit with this, because it is the exact thing that Sophia's mistake will violate, and unless you feel the law, you cannot feel the transgression. In the fullness, to bring forth in harmony with your partner, in accord with the whole and the source. That was the way of things, and it produced light and balance and belonging. And the implication, unstated but present, was that to bring forth otherwise, alone, without one's partner, without the consent of the whole, out of a longing that leaped ahead of the harmony, would be to bring forth something that did not belong, something out of balance, something that fell outside the whole. The law of the fullness was harmony, and harmony's shadow, its one possible violation, was to act alone. And do not hear the word alone here as a condemnation of solitude, as if the Gnostics were saying that being by yourself is a sin. That is not the meaning. The alone that broke the fullness was not the quiet of a soul at peace in its own company. It was the isolation of acting cut off from the whole, of reaching for something as if you were separate from everything else, as if your will alone were sufficient, as if you did not need harmony, or relationship, or the consent of what is larger than you. It is the aloneness of the closed system, the self that has forgotten it is part of a whole. And this, the Gnostics believed, is the deep root of what goes wrong, at every scale. Not solitude, but separation. Not being by yourself, but acting as though you were the only self, the only will, the only reference point that mattered. Yaldabaoth, remember, will embody this perfectly. I am God, and there is no other. That is the ultimate form of the alone that broke the world, the total conviction of one's own separateness and supremacy. And it began in miniature and in innocence with Sophia's one solitary reach, made as if she could bring forth in isolation from the harmony she was part of. The whole story is in a sense a meditation on the difference between belonging and separation, and on how much sorrow flows from a being, however good, acting as if it stood alone. And here is the deep and human thing the Gnostics were reaching for, hidden inside this cosmic architecture. They were saying that even in the highest world, even among beings of pure light, there is a way that creation is meant to happen, in relationship, in balance, in accord with something larger than oneself, and that when creation happens otherwise, out of a longing that will not wait for harmony, what comes forth is flawed. It is a profound intuition about the nature of things, that the good is not only a matter of what you want, even when what you want is good in itself, but of whether your reaching is in harmony with the whole. That a beautiful longing, pursued alone, out of order, ahead of its time, can bring forth something broken. Hold that, because it is the whole meaning of what Sophia is about to do. Let us meet her. Her name means wisdom. In the Old Greek, Sophia, the same word that hides inside our word philosophy, which means the love of wisdom. And she was not a minor figure in the fullness. She was one of the Aeons, one of the beings of the divine light, and in the accounts she is often the last of them, the youngest, the one at the outermost edge of the fullness, farthest in a sense, from the unknowable source at the centre, though still wholly within the light. And it matters that she was wisdom, and it matters that she was the youngest, because wisdom of all the divine qualities is the one that reaches. Wisdom is the impulse to understand, to know, to comprehend the depths of things. The other Aeons embodied qualities like truth and life and mind, but Sophia embodied the very drive to grasp the whole, to fathom the source, to know. She was, you might say, the seeking quality of the divine itself, personified, the part of God, if we can speak so loosely, that wants to know God. And being the youngest, the one at the edge, she had a particular relationship to the great centre, she was the farthest from it, and so perhaps the one in whom the longing to reach it, burned most intensely. You know this feeling in a smaller form. It is often the one at the edge, the youngest, the one who feels the distance most, who reaches hardest toward the centre. So do not picture Sophia as a fool, or as a wicked thing, or as a rebel. Picture the wisest of beings, the embodiment of the longing to understand, standing at the far edge of an infinite light, gazing inward toward a source so deep and so beautiful that even the highest Aeons could not fully comprehend it. Picture the one whose very nature was to seek. Seeking, that is who Sophia was. Her tragedy is not the tragedy of a villain. It is the tragedy of a seeker, the deepest, purest seeker there is, whose seeking carried her past the edge of what could safely be reached. And there is something important in the fact that it was wisdom, specifically, who fell. The Gnostics could have told a story in which some lesser or darker quality caused the flaw in the world. They did not. They said it was wisdom herself. The seeking, understanding, comprehending impulse of the divine, that is what overreached. And this tells you something about how the Gnostics understood the danger and the glory of knowledge, which was the very thing their whole tradition was built around. They did not think knowledge was safe. They did not think seeking was without peril. They put, at the very origin of the world's flaw, an act of wisdom reaching too far. And yet they also made knowledge, gnosis, the way home. So knowledge for them was the most double-edged thing in existence, the cause of the fall when it reaches alone and out of order, and the cause of the rescue when it becomes true recognition of the source. Sophia is the embodiment of both edges of that blade. She is wisdom that reached wrongly, and her restoration will be wisdom that comes to know rightly. And there is a reason the Gnostics could bear to tell such a story about wisdom, rather than protecting her from blame. A reason that goes to the heart of who they were. They were seekers. Their whole tradition was built on the conviction that knowledge, gnosis, is the way home. So they of all people knew intimately the perils of the seeking life. They knew that the pursuit of knowledge can go wrong, that it can become pride, that it can become a grasping, isolating thing, that the very drive that leads toward the light can, if it reaches wrongly, lead into the dark. They were not naive about their own path. They put Sophia's fall at the origin of the world precisely because they understood, from the inside, that the seeker's gift is also the seeker's danger, that the same reaching that can carry you home can also, pursued alone and out of harmony, cast you down. Sophia is, in a sense, the Gnostics' honest portrait of themselves, and of everyone who has ever made the search for truth the centre of their life. She is a warning and a promise at once. The seeking can fall, and the seeking can be redeemed, and it is the same seeking, turned two different ways. Hold her in your mind, the wisest, the youngest, the seeker at the edge of the light, and let us watch what she longed for. What did Sophia want? This is the tender centre of the whole story, and the texts are careful about it, because everything depends on our understanding that what she wanted was not, in itself, wicked. Sophia longed to know the source. The unknowable one, the depth at the centre of the fullness, the origin from which she and all the Aeons had come. She wanted to comprehend it, to reach all the way back to the beginning, to grasp the ungraspable, to know directly the very ground of her own being. Think about how natural, even how noble, that longing is. It is the longing of every mystic, every seeker, every soul that has ever ached to know God directly rather than at a distance. It is the highest form of the deepest human desire, to go home to the source, to understand where we come from, to touch the origin. Sophia's longing was, in a sense, the most beautiful longing there is. It was the love of wisdom itself, reaching for its ultimate object. But there was a flaw folded inside the beauty of it, and the texts locate the flaw precisely. Sophia wanted to reach the source directly, alone, without her partner, without the consent and participation of the whole fullness, without the proper order, the harmony, the balance that was the law of that world. In some versions, the flaw is that she tried to comprehend what cannot be comprehended by any single Aeon, that she reached for a direct grasp of the infinite that was not hers to have alone. In others, the flaw is specifically that she brought forth, that she tried to create or to emanate, without her counterpart, by herself, out of her own solitary will. And in the deepest versions, these are the same thing. She tried to reach the source, and to bring forth from that reaching, on her own, ahead of the harmony, without waiting, without the whole. Sit with the exact shape of the flaw, because it is so human it aches. It was not that she wanted the wrong thing, she wanted the highest thing, to know the source. It was that she wanted it on her own terms, by herself, now, without waiting for the harmony, without her partner, without the consent of the whole. Her longing outran the order, her reaching leaped ahead of the balance. She wanted to grasp the infinite directly, alone, and the wanting itself was pure, but the way of the wanting, solitary, impatient, out of harmony, was the crack through which everything would fall. And is this not the very shape of so much of human sorrow? Not that we wanted evil things, but that we wanted good things wrongly, too fast, too much for ourselves alone, without patience, without others, without regard for the larger harmony we are part of. The reaching for something genuinely beautiful, in a way that breaks the very thing we were reaching through. Sophia is the cosmic pattern of that most human of tragedies, the good longing, pursued in a way that shatters. The Gnostics placed it at the origin of the world because they believed it was the origin of the world, and because they knew it was the origin of so much sorrow in every life. And there is a further subtlety in Sophia's longing that is worth drawing out, because it protects the story from a misreading. It would be easy to conclude that the lesson is simply do not reach, do not long, do not seek, that Sophia's fall is a warning against desire itself, and that safety lies in wanting nothing. But that is not what the Gnostics believed, and it is not what the story teaches. Sophia's longing was not the problem. Longing for the source is the highest and truest thing a being can do. It is in a sense what the light is for. The entire path home later will be driven by exactly this longing, rightly directed. The problem was never that she wanted the source. The problem was the how, the grasping, the solitude, the impatience, the leaping ahead of harmony. So the story is not a warning against longing. It is a teaching about how to long. It says your deepest desire, the ache for the source, is holy. Do not kill it. Do not be ashamed of it, but learn to carry it rightly, in harmony, with patience, with an open hand rather than a closing fist. The tragedy of Sophia is not that she wanted too much. It is that she wanted the right thing in the wrong way. And that is a tragedy you can learn from without having to amputate your own longing, which is good, because the longing rightly held is the very thing that will carry you home. Now let us watch, gently, the moment the longing became an act. Here is the moment, and the texts, when they come to it, have a strange delicacy, as if describing something too sorrowful to state too baldly. But the shape of it is clear. Sophia, out of her longing, acted, she brought forth. Out of herself, alone, without her partner, without the consent of the spirit, without the harmony of the whole fullness, she put forth a thought, an emanation, a bringing into being, reaching to create as the source creates, reaching to bring forth out of her own solitary desire to know and to make. In the secret book of John, the text says she wanted to bring forth a likeness out of herself, without the consent of the Spirit and without her partner, and because she did so, because the act was solitary, out of order, without the harmony, what came forth was not like her. It came forth flawed. Let us be very careful and very gentle here about what the mistake actually was, because it is easy to moralize it wrongly. The mistake was not that Sophia loved too much, or sought too much in some general sense. The mistake was structural, almost physical in the logic of that world. In the fullness, to bring forth wholeness required harmony, the partner, the consent, the order. Sophia brought forth without them, and so what came forth lacked what they would have given it. It came forth incomplete, unbalanced, missing the very harmony that would have made it whole. It is almost like a law of that world: what is made alone, out of harmony, comes out broken. Not as a punishment, as a consequence, as simply what happens when creation leaps ahead of the balance that creation requires. And notice, this is crucial, and it is the mercy at the heart of the whole thing. There is no evil in Sophia's intent. She did not set out to make a monster. She did not set out to make a world of suffering. She did not rebel against the source, or seek to overthrow it, or hate anything. She loved. She longed. She reached. Her sin, if we even want to use that word, was a sin of excess love, of impatient longing, of reaching for the highest thing in a way that broke the harmony. The Gnostics were doing something extraordinary here. They were tracing the entire flaw of the cosmos, all the suffering, all the brokenness, this whole aching world, back not to malice, but to a misdirected act of love by the wisest of beings. The root of the world's evil, in this vision, is not evil at all. It is love that overreached. Pause on how radical that is compared to almost every other account of the fall. Most stories of how things went wrong need a villain, a rebel, an adversary, a will that chose darkness over light. They locate the origin of evil in evil. The Gnostic story refuses to do this at the very first cause. At the root of everything, it places not a villain but a lover, not malice but longing, not a will that chose the dark but a wisdom that reached too far toward the light. Evil, in this vision, has no pure origin of its own. It is a byproduct, a distortion, a consequence, something that came into being sideways, out of a good longing gone out of harmony, rather than something that was ever willed for its own sake. This is a profound and, in its way, hopeful claim about the nature of reality, that darkness is not an original power equal to the light, not a thing in itself, but a kind of shadow cast by light reaching wrongly. And if that is so, then darkness has no deep roots. It is not woven into the foundation of things as an equal and opposite force. It is a wound in the light, and wounds can heal. There is no eternal evil to be defeated in this story, only a mistake to be mended and a scattered light to be gathered home. Sit with how that changes the feeling of everything. If you have ever caused harm not by wanting to harm, but by loving wrongly, by wanting something good too desperately, by reaching for connection or understanding or meaning in a way that broke what you were reaching through, then you know Sophia's mistake from the inside. It is the most forgivable and the most sorrowful kind of wrong there is. And the Gnostics put it at the foundation of the world. The world is flawed, they said, not because someone was wicked, but because wisdom loved too much, too fast, alone, and now we have to look at what her reaching brought forth. Because the tragedy of Sophia's mistake is that something came out of it, something that should never have been. Let us look at it, gently. What Sophia brought forth was not like the beings of the fullness. The Aeons were radiant, whole, harmonious, each a perfect facet of the light. What came out of Sophia's solitary reaching was none of those things. It was malformed, imperfect, something that did not belong to the light at all. The secret book of John describes it, and the description is unforgettable. It says that what she brought forth was imperfect and different in appearance from her, because she had made it without her partner, and it gives it a form. The form of a serpent with the face of a lion, with eyes that flashed like bolts of fire. A hybrid thing, a chimera, part beast and part serpent, glowing with a fire that was not the pure light of the fullness, but something harsher, wilder, wrong. Picture it against the backdrop of that infinite harmony of light, this one twisted, fiery, serpentine, leonine thing, thrashing into being where nothing had ever been out of place before. It was the first ugliness, the first thing in all of reality that did not belong. And Sophia's reaction is one of the most human moments in the whole cosmic story. She was ashamed. She saw what she had made, and she was filled with shame, and she did what a person does when they have made something they cannot bear to have others see. She hid it. The text says she cast it away from herself, out of the place of the Aeons, so that none of the immortals would see it, for she had made it in ignorance. She wrapped it in a cloud, a luminous cloud, and set it apart, outside the fullness, in a place of its own, so that no one would know what she had done. And she gave it a name. She called it Yaldabaoth, sit with the shame, because it is so recognizable it hurts. Sophia does not at first repent or confess or cry out for help. She hides. She takes the flawed thing she has made and she pushes it away, out of sight, into a cloud, hoping no one will see, hoping to conceal the evidence of her mistake. It is the oldest response to shame there is, not to face what we have done, but to hide it, to push it outside, to pretend it is not there. And the tragedy is that hiding the flawed thing did not unmake it. It only set it loose, alone, outside the light, where it would grow. What we hide in shame does not disappear. It goes off into the dark, unsupervised, and becomes something. Sophia's hidden mistake, cast out and concealed, was about to become a god. There is a psychological truth buried in this image so precise that it could be a teaching all on its own. Consider what happens in a human life with the things we are ashamed of and refuse to face, the mistakes we hide, the parts of ourselves we cast out and wrap in a cloud and pretend are not there. They do not vanish. They go into the shadow, unexamined, unintegrated, and there they grow and gain a strange power and begin to run parts of our lives from the dark, precisely because we will not look at them. The thing we cannot bear to face becomes, in a sense, a little god in the basement of the self, ruling more of us than we know, exactly because it has been cast out of the light of our attention. Sophia's mistake is the cosmic version of this. She cast the flawed thing out of the light rather than facing it, and in the dark, unfaced, it grew into a ruler. And the deep implication, both cosmic and personal, is the same. What you refuse to face does not disappear. It goes into the dark and becomes a power over you. The only way to strip the shadow of its false godhood is to turn and look at it, which is exactly what Sophia will eventually have to do, and what her whole restoration will require. But first, the hidden thing grows into its full and terrible strength, because here is the terrible irony at the centre of the whole story. Yaldabaoth was flawed, malformed, cast out, but he was not powerless, because when Sophia brought him forth, something went with him. A portion of her own light, her own power, her own divine substance passed into him in the making. He carried, buried inside his misshapen being, a stolen inheritance. A fragment of the true light of the fullness, taken from his mother in the very act of his flawed creation. He did not understand it. He did not know where it came from, but it was in him. And with that stolen light, that fragment of real divine power he did not comprehend, this cast out, malformed, lonely thing was about to do something no one expected. He was about to create. Let us watch the flawed God build a flawed world. Cast out of the light, hidden in his cloud, alone, Yaldabaoth did not know that anything existed above him. He did not know about the fullness. He did not know about the Aeons, or the source, or even about Sophia, his own mother. He had been made in ignorance and set apart in concealment, and so he grew up, if we can put it that way, in total isolation, believing himself to be alone in all of reality, and carrying, without understanding it, a stolen portion of the true light, which gave him real power. And he used that power to create. This is the great strange turn of the story. The flawed thing became a maker. Drawing on the light he had stolen, Yaldabaoth brought forth beings of his own. Rulers, powers, authorities. A whole hierarchy of lesser beings to populate the realm he was building. The Gnostics called these the archons, the rulers. He made them in his own image, out of his own ignorance, and he set them over the regions of the cosmos he was constructing. He made a whole world, a lower world, beneath the fullness, a shadow and a copy of a light he had never seen and did not know existed. He organized it, and ordered it, and filled it with his rulers, and it became the material cosmos, the world of matter and time and the turning heavens. Now here is what makes this world flawed at its root, and it is worth dwelling on, because it is the answer to the question we began with. Yaldabaoth was building a copy of the fullness, but he had never seen the fullness. He was working from the fragment of light within him, from a dim, unconscious memory of a harmony he did not know he was imitating. So what he built was a distorted copy. A world that echoes the true world but gets it wrong. A world with real beauty in it, because the stolen light was real but shot through with distortion, imbalance and lack, because the maker was flawed and blind and did not understand what he was imitating. That is why the world is the way it is. That is why it is so beautiful and so broken at once. The beauty is the trace of the stolen light, the real divine substance shining through. The brokenness is the flaw of the maker, the distortion of a copy made by a blind hand from a source it could not see. Sit with that answer to the oldest question, because it is subtle and it is satisfying in a way the other answers are not. The world is not perfect, because it was not made by the perfect one. The world is not simply evil, either, because it was made with real light, stolen light, true divine substance woven into it. The world is a flawed copy, genuinely beautiful, genuinely broken, because it was made by a genuinely powerful but genuinely blind maker, working from a light he carried but did not understand. Every sunset and every disease, every act of love and every act of cruelty, all of it comes from the same source, a blind God building a copy of a heaven he never saw, out of a light he stole and could not comprehend. And this is worth pausing on, because it resolves something that torments people who try to hold the world as either simply good or simply evil. Look honestly at existence, and you cannot say it is all good. The suffering is too real, too vast, too woven into the structure of things. But neither can you say it is all evil. The beauty is too real, the love too real, the moments of grace too undeniable. The world stubbornly refuses to be either, and most explanations have to explain away half of the evidence. The ones who say it is all good have to minimize the horror, and the ones who say it is all darkness have to minimize the beauty. The Gnostic account does not have to explain away anything, because it expects exactly this mixture. Of course the world is beautiful. It is built from real, stolen, divine light. Of course the world is broken. It is built by a blind and flawed maker. The mixture is not a paradox to be resolved. It is the signature of the world's true origin. Every time you feel the ache of beauty and brokenness together, a sunset that is almost unbearably lovely and also fading, a love that is real and also mortal, a life that is precious and also doomed, you are feeling exactly the fingerprint of a flawed God building with a stolen light. The doubleness of the world is not a problem for this story, it is the evidence for it. And the crowning flaw of this blind maker, the thing that reveals most completely what he is what he came to believe about himself. Let us hear his boast. Yaldabaoth, having built his world and filled it with his rulers, looked out over all he had made, and he came to a conclusion about himself. And the Gnostics record his conclusion in a single sentence that they clearly found to be the most revealing thing anyone had ever said. He declared, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." Now, everything depends on hearing this rightly, because it is easy to hear it as arrogance, as pride, as a boast in the ordinary sense. But it is deeper and sadder than that. Yaldabaoth was not lying. He genuinely believed it. He had never seen the fullness. He did not know about the source, or the Aeons, or his mother Sophia, or the infinite light above him. From inside his own world, looking around at everything he could perceive, he truly was the highest thing that existed. He was the maker of his cosmos. He ruled over his archons. There was, as far as he could see, nothing and no one above him. So when he said, "I am God and there is no other," he was not boasting. He was reporting accurately the limits of his own vision. He believed he was the only God because he could not see past himself. And that is the essence of what the Gnostics called the blind God. They gave him other names that capture it. They called him Samael, which can be understood to mean the blind God. They called him Saklas, which means the fool. Not evil, exactly, blind, not malicious, so much as ignorant. And dangerous precisely because of his ignorance. Here was a being with enormous power, ruling an entire world, utterly convinced he was the supreme and only God, and completely unaware that he was himself a flawed product of a higher realm he could not perceive. He was not the devil. He was something more unsettling than a devil, a powerful, sincere, blind ruler who did not know what he was, and who mistook his own limited world for the whole of reality. And there is something in Yaldabaoth's condition that is worth recognizing in ourselves, because the blind God is not only a cosmic figure, he is a mirror of a certain state the human mind can fall into. To be so enclosed in your own perspective that you cannot conceive of anything above or beyond it. To mistake the little world you can see for the whole of what is. To say in effect, "I am the measure of reality, and there is nothing higher than what I already know." We can all slip into a smaller version of Yaldabaoth's blindness, certain of our own view, unable to imagine we might be a small and partial thing inside a vastness we cannot perceive, mistaking our limited world for all the world there is. The Gnostics would say that this closed certainty, this inability to conceive of anything higher than oneself, is the very essence of the fallen condition, and that the beginning of waking up is the humility to suspect that there is more than you can see, that you, too, might be mistaken about the size of reality and about what you are, and here the Gnostics did something that made them dangerous and got their books buried, and is worth stating plainly because it is the sharp edge of the whole myth. They looked at this figure, the world maker who declares I am God and there is no other, who demands worship, who rules through law and fear, who does not know there is anything higher than himself, and they noticed how closely he resembled the God that much of the religion around them worshipped. The jealous world ruler who says, there is no God but him. And they drew the shattering conclusion that a great many people, without knowing it, were worshipping not the true source at all, but the blind God, the flawed maker, the boastful ruler, the cast-out mistake who believed himself supreme, that the true and infinite fullness was something else entirely, higher, gentler, beyond this world, and largely unknown, while the being most people called God was in truth Yaldabaoth, sincerely mistaken about his own supremacy. You can understand why that idea could not be allowed to survive in the open. But Yaldabaoth's boast did not go unanswered. Into his blind and self-satisfied world, a voice spoke. Let us hear it. When Yaldabaoth declared that he was the only God, the light did not stay silent. In the secret book of John, a voice comes from above, from the fullness, from the realm he could not see, and it speaks into his blind world a correction that shatters, or should shatter, his whole illusion. The voice says, "You are mistaken," and then it says something more, something that names the very thing he denied. It says, humanity exists, and the child of humanity. There is one above you. You are not the first, and you are not alone, and you are not the highest. You are wrong about yourself. And in some of the texts, this voice is accompanied by a vision. The image of the true perfect human, the divine prototype, the real form of humanity that exists in the fullness above, is revealed, shining down, appearing reflected upon the waters of the lower world, so that Yaldabaoth and his rulers see, imprinted on the deep beneath them, the luminous image of something infinitely higher than themselves, a form of beauty and light they did not make and cannot match, the revelation of the true human blazing above the blind God's world, exposing the lie of his supremacy. Sit with what this voice is, because it is the first turn of the whole story back toward hope, and it comes from Sophia's side of things, from the light she fell from, the realm that has not forgotten her, or the fragment of itself trapped below. The voice from above is the fullness refusing to let the blind God's illusion stand unchallenged. It is the truth breaking into the closed world of the flawed maker, announcing that there is more, that he is not the top, that a higher reality exists and is watching and is about to act. Everything that will rescue Sophia and everything that will rescue the light trapped in the world begins with this: the refusal of the light above to abandon what has fallen below. The blind God says, "There is no other." And the light answers, "You are mistaken," because it will not leave the lie unanswered, and it will not leave the trapped light unrescued. And notice the deep pattern here, because it runs through everything the Gnostics believed, and it is a source of real comfort. The correction comes from above, unbidden. Yaldabaoth did not ask to be corrected. The trapped light did not cry out first. The initiative comes from the fullness, reaching down into the flawed world, of its own accord, out of its own nature, to reveal the truth and begin the rescue. This is the Gnostic vision of grace, that the light above is not passive, not indifferent, not waiting to be earned or summoned, but actively reaching down into the darkness of the flawed world to awaken what has fallen. The voice that corrects Yaldabaoth is the same movement that will, in time, reach all the way down to the human soul and whisper, "You are mistaken about what you are. There is something higher. Wake up." And there is a particular comfort in what the voice actually says, if you receive it in your own life. It does not say to the blind God, "You are evil, you are condemned, you will be destroyed." It says, "You are mistaken." It corrects an error rather than pronouncing a doom. And that is how the light, in this whole tradition, addresses the fallen and the blind, not primarily with condemnation, but with correction. Not "you are wicked," but "you are wrong about what you are, and here is the truth." Think about how that might sound if the voice were speaking to you, into whatever blind and closed place you have shut yourself into, the false beliefs about your own smallness, your own worthlessness, your own separateness, the little walled world you have mistaken for all of reality. The voice does not come to shame you, it comes to correct you. It says, "You are mistaken about what you are. There is something higher, and it is closer than you think, and you belong to it." That is the tone of grace in Sophia's world, not a verdict, but a waking up, not "you are damned." But you are wrong, and here is what is true. But before we follow the rescue down into the world, we have to return to Sophia herself. Because while all of this was happening below, Sophia, above, had seen what she had done. And her story turns now from mistake to grief. Let us go to her. Sophia saw. She saw the thing she had made, the blind God, the flawed maker, boasting in his shadow world that he was the only God, building a distorted cosmos out of the light he had stolen from her. She saw the consequence of her solitary reaching spreading out below her into a whole world of distortion and, eventually, of suffering, and the shame that had made her hide her mistake turned now into something deeper. It turned into grief. And then, out of the grief, into something that would begin to save her. Repentance. The secret book of John describes it with great tenderness. Sophia recognized what she had done. She saw her deficiency, the lack, the wrongness, the falling short that her act had produced, and she began to move to and fro, the text says, in her distress. She grieved, and she repented. She turned, which is what repentance truly means, a turning. She turned away from the concealment and the shame, and she turned back toward the light she had fallen from, and she cried out. And her cry did not go unheard. The text says that her partner did not come to her at first in her own person, but that the whole fullness heard her repentance, and prayed on her behalf and interceded for her before the invisible spirit, the source. Sophia, who had acted alone, was now in her grief no longer alone. The whole light turned toward her fallen sister and lifted its voice for her. This is the part of Sophia's story that almost everyone forgets, and it is the most important part, and it is why the greatest of the texts about her is named not for her mistake, but for her faith and her turning. There is an entire text, the Pistis Sophia, the faith wisdom, that consists largely of Sophia's cries from the depths of her fallen condition, song after song of repentance and longing, as she calls out from the chaos she has fallen into, confessing her error, pleading to be remembered, begging the light to lift her home. They are among the most moving passages in all of Gnostic literature, the wisest of beings, brought low by her own reaching, crying up out of the darkness toward a home she can barely remember but cannot stop longing for. And they are heard. That is the whole point. They are heard. Let me give you the flavour of those cries, because they are unlike anything else in ancient literature, and they are strangely close to the way a human heart actually speaks in its lowest hours. Sophia in the depths does not compose elegant theology. She pleads. She says, "In effect, I have fallen into the darkness, and I have no strength left. The powers of the chaos press in on me. I looked for light and found darkness. I looked for one to help me and found none. Save me, for I have believed in the light. Do not abandon me in the depths. Remember me and lift me out of the chaos, for I have been brought very low." Song after song in that key, the confession of the fall, the honesty about how low she has been brought, and then, always, the turning, "But I have believed in the light, but I trust that you will lift me, but I have not forgotten where I came from." It is the voice of someone at the very bottom who has stopped defending herself and started simply crying toward home. And if you have ever been at your own bottom, truly at the end of your strength, past pretending, past managing, able only to cry out towards something you hope is still there, then you have prayed Sophia's prayer, whether you knew its name or not. And the promise woven through the whole Pistis Sophia is that the crying is not wasted. The light hears. The light always hears the one who has stopped hiding and started calling. Sit with the shape of this, because it is the turning of the entire cosmos from tragedy toward hope, and it hangs on a single movement. Sophia stops hiding and starts turning. As long as she concealed her mistake in shame, nothing could heal. The moment she faced it, grieved it, and turned back toward the light, the healing began, not by her own power, but because the light, seeing her turn, moved toward her. This is the Gnostic account of how any fall is repaired. Not by hiding the mistake, not by pretending it away, but by facing it, grieving it honestly, and turning back toward the source, at which point the source, which never abandoned you, moves to lift you home. Sophia's grief is not the end of her story. It is the hinge on which her story turns from fall toward rescue. And the specific way the Gnostics described what her grief became as it fell into the lower world is one of the strangest and most beautiful ideas in the whole tradition. Let us follow her grief down into the making of the world. Here we come to an idea so strange and so poignant that I want to be honest that it is told most fully in one particular stream of Gnostic teaching, the tradition associated with the great teacher Valentinus and those who followed him. In this version, the story of Sophia is doubled and deepened, and something extraordinary is said about what became of her suffering. It is said that her passion, her grief, her fear, her confusion, her longing did not simply vanish. It became the very substance of the material world. Let me explain, because it is worth understanding. In the Valentinian telling, when Sophia fell into her deficiency, her emotional turmoil, the anguish of her fallen state, was separated out and became the raw material from which the lower world was formed. Her grief became one element of matter, her fear became another. Her confusion, her bewilderment, her sorrow, her longing to return, each of these passions, cast out and given substance, became part of the fabric of the material cosmos. The world in this vision is quite literally made out of the frozen, externalized emotions of a fallen divine being. The heaviness of matter is her grief made solid. The turning, changeable, restless quality of the world is her confusion given form. The world is Sophia's passion, crystallized. Sit with what that does to the way you see everything around you. It means the material world is not neutral, and it is not merely a machine, and it is not simply evil. It is sorrow made visible. It is the externalized suffering of a being who reached too far and fell, and whose anguish became the very stuff of everything you can touch. And this explains something the Gnostics felt very deeply, the strange melancholy that hangs over even the most beautiful things in this world. the ache that is somehow present even in beauty, the sense that even joy here is shadowed, that even the loveliest moments carry a kind of sorrow underneath them. If the world itself is made of a divine being's grief, then of course it feels this way. Of course there is longing woven into everything. Of course beauty here makes us ache. We are living inside Sophia's sorrow, and some deep part of us feels it, and recognises it, and grieves along with it without knowing why. And there is a second Sophia in this telling, which is worth naming because it adds a layer of hope. The Valentinians distinguished between the higher Sophia, who was ultimately restored to the fullness, and a lower aspect, sometimes given her own name, who remained below in the world she had become, still longing, still reaching, still waiting to be brought home. This lower Sophia is in a sense the divine presence trapped within the material world itself, the light and longing still buried in creation, still aching toward the source. And that means the world is not only made of Sophia's grief, it is also inhabited by her longing, a divine yearning, hidden in the very heart of matter, reaching, always.
Back toward the light, the world grieves, but the world also longs, and that longing buried in creation and in you is the thread that leads home.
And I want to be honest that this idea, the world made of a divine being's grief, is a poetic and mythic vision, not a claim you are asked to take as literal physics. But sit with it as poetry, and notice how much it explains that a colder account cannot. Why does nature itself seem to mourn the falling of the light at evening, the turning of the leaves? The way beauty and sadness are so often braided together that we can barely tell them apart? Why do the most beautiful pieces of music, the ones that move us most deeply, so often carry a strain of sorrow in them? Why does a perfect moment so often bring the ache of knowing it will pass? A purely mechanical world should not feel this way, but a world made of Sophia's grief would feel exactly this way, shot through with a sorrow that is not merely ours, a melancholy woven into the substance of things themselves. The Gnostics were not being morbid when they said this. They were being faithful to something they, and perhaps you, have actually felt, that the world grieves, quietly, underneath its beauty, as if it remembered a home it had lost. And they gave that feeling a name and a story. The world aches because the world is made of an ache, and the same ache in you is the homesickness that will not let you settle, the longing that is really the world's own longing to be gathered back to the light. Now let us follow the rescue, how Sophia, above and below, is brought back toward the light. Sophia's story does not end in the depths. This is the thing to hold on to through the whole of it, and it is why her tale, for all its sorrow, is finally a story of hope. She is rescued. The light she fell from reaches down and lifts her home. In the secret book of John, after Sophia repents and the whole fullness intercedes for her, the source responds. Her partner is sent to her. She is raised up, though not at first all the way back to her original place. The text says she was restored, but placed for a time in a kind of intermediate condition, above the world she had accidentally caused, but not yet fully returned to her original rank, until her deficiency could be corrected, until the light she had lost, the light that had been stolen into Yaldabaoth and scattered into the world, could be gathered back. Her full restoration is bound up with the recovery of her scattered light. She cannot be entirely whole again until the light that fell with her is brought home, And so her rescue and the rescue of the world become the same project. To restore Sophia fully is to gather back all the light that fell, which means to rescue every trapped spark, every fallen fragment, all the way down to the sparks buried in human beings. In the Valentinian telling, the rescue is dramatized even more beautifully. The lower Sophia, trapped in her passion and her longing below, is visited by a saviour sent from the fullness, a being of the light who comes to her and gives her form and separates her from her suffering and turns her passions from formless anguish into something that can be redeemed and gives her the knowledge she was reaching for in the first place. What she could not seize by grasping, alone, out of order, the knowledge of the source, is finally given to her freely by the light, when she has turned and is ready to receive it. Her original longing is fulfilled, but in the right way, at the right time, through relationship and gift, rather than through solitary reaching. The very thing she fell trying to grasp is placed gently in her hands once she has stopped grasping. Sit with the deep justice and mercy of that, because it says something profound about how the deepest longings are actually fulfilled. Sophia wanted to know the source. She tried to seize that knowledge alone, and fell, and shattered a world. And in the end, she receives exactly what she wanted, the knowledge of the source. But she receives it as a gift, in harmony, through the light reaching down to her after she has turned and grieved and been made ready. The lesson folded into the cosmic story is one the Gnostics believed applied to every soul. The highest things cannot be seized, they can only be received. The reaching that grasps, alone and out of order, breaks. The reaching that turns and waits and opens and is made ready, receives. Sophia gets home not by trying harder to grab the light, but by turning toward it and letting it come to her. And there is a detail in her rescue that is easy to pass over, but is quietly one of the most reassuring things in the whole myth. She does not have to earn her way back to worthiness before the light comes for her. Look at the order of events. Sophia does not first repair the damage, does not first undo Yaldabaoth, does not first prove she has become good enough to be readmitted. She simply repents, turns, grieves, cries out, and the light responds to the turning itself, not to any completed penance. The rescue begins while she is still in her deficiency, still in her fallen state, still far from whole. The light does not say, "Become worthy and then I will come." It says, in effect, turn, and I am already coming. This is the Gnostic form of grace, and it is worth naming plainly because so many of us live under the opposite belief that we must fix ourselves first, become acceptable first, earn our way back to love before love will have us. Sophia's rescue says no. The turning is enough to begin it. You do not clean yourself up and then get lifted. You turn, and the lifting is what cleans you. The light comes for the one who turns, exactly as she is in the middle of the mess, and does the mending on the way home. And her homecoming is the pattern and the promise for all the scattered light, including, the Gnostics believed, the fragment of it that is in you. Which brings us to the most important thing of all. Before we go further, we have to be clear about what kind of story this really is, because everything turns on one distinction. It was a mistake. It was not a crime. We have to pause here and name something directly, because it is the beating heart of why this story matters and why it feels so different from other accounts of how the world went wrong. Sophia's fall was a mistake. It was not a crime. And that distinction changes everything about how we understand the flaw in the world and the flaw in ourselves. Think about the other great stories of how things went wrong. In many of them, the fall is a crime, a deliberate act of disobedience or rebellion. Someone is told not to do a thing and does it anyway, knowingly, and is punished. The fall is framed as guilt, as transgression, as a wrong that deserves condemnation. And that framing leaves a particular residue in the soul of everyone who inherits it, the sense that we are at bottom guilty things, that the brokenness of the world and of ourselves is a punishment we deserve, that shame is the appropriate response to our very existence. Sophia's story refuses that framing entirely. She did not rebel, she was not told no and defy it. She did not act out of malice or pride in the sense of wanting to overthrow the source, or any desire to do harm. She acted out of love, a love that reached too far, too fast. Alone, her fall is not a crime to be punished. It is a mistake to be grieved and repaired. And notice how the source responds to it. Not with punishment, not with condemnation. The fullness hears her repentance and intercedes for her. The light is sent to lift her home. The response to Sophia's mistake is not wrath, it is rescue. The whole tenor of the divine response is not, "You have sinned and must be punished," but "You have fallen and will be brought home. Sit with how different a universe this is to live in." If the flaw in the world came from a crime, then the world is a courtroom, and we're the guilty, and the fundamental question of existence is whether we can be forgiven. But if the flaw in the world came from a mistake of love, made by the wisest of beings, met not with punishment but with rescue, then the world is not a courtroom. It is more like a home in which something went wrong and is being patiently mended, and we are not at bottom guilty things awaiting sentence. We are fallen light being gathered home. The whole emotional weather of existence changes depending on which of these stories you believe you are living in. The Gnostics chose the second. They looked at the brokenness of everything and said, "This is not a crime scene. This is a wound. And wounds are not punished. They are healed." And here is why this matters so intimately for you, and why it is not just a point about cosmology. Because the same distinction applies to your own falls. Most of us carry our failures as crimes, as guilt, as shame, as evidence that we are bad. Sophia's story offers another way to hold them, as mistakes. Often mistakes of love, of reaching, of wanting good things wrongly, mistakes to be grieved honestly and then turned from, met not with self-condemnation, but with the patient work of repair. The universe, in this vision, does not condemn Sophia for her mistake. And if the very being whose mistake broke the world is met with rescue rather than wrath, then perhaps you can extend the same mercy to yourself. Perhaps your failures too are wounds to be healed rather than crimes to be punished. That is not permission to do harm. It is a truer, gentler way to carry the harm you have done, the way the fullness carried Sophia's. And notice that this gentler framing does not make the mistake matter less. This is important, because people sometimes fear that treating a fall as a wound rather than a crime somehow excuses it, makes it trivial, lets us off too easily. But look at Sophia's story. Her mistake was not trivial. It brought forth a whole world of suffering. The consequences were enormous, real, and lasting. Treating it as a mistake rather than a crime did not shrink it. What it changed was not the seriousness of the harm, but the way the harm is met, with grief and repair rather than with condemnation and punishment. And in fact, this way of holding it asks more of you, not less. Condemnation is, in a strange way, the easy path. You declare the thing evil, you punish it or yourself, and you are done. Repair is harder. Repair requires you to actually face the harm, grieve it honestly, understand how it happened, turn from the pattern that caused it and do the slow work of gathering back what was scattered. Sophia is not let off easily. She has to grieve and turn and wait through a long exile while her scattered light is gathered home. The mercy is real, but it is not cheap. It is the mercy that takes the wound seriously enough to heal it, rather than merely to punish it, which is the harder, deeper, and more loving response of the two. Now let us follow the thread all the way down to where this cosmic story touches you most directly. To the spark. To Sophia's light. In you. Remember what happened when Sophia fell. A portion of her light, her own divine substance, a fragment of the true fullness, went out of her into Yaldabaoth, and from him it was scattered into the world he made. And remember that Sophia's full restoration depends on that light being gathered back. This is not a detail, it is the thread that connects the whole cosmic story directly to you, because the Gnostics believed that the scattered light of Sophia did not stay only in the general fabric of the world. It came to be buried in fragments inside human beings, inside you. This is the teaching of the divine spark, and it is the point where Sophia's story stops being a myth about the distant past and becomes a truth about your own depths. The Gnostics believed that within each human being, beneath the body, beneath the ordinary personality, beneath all the layers of the flawed world, there is a fragment of the true light, a spark of the fullness, a piece of the very divine substance that fell with Sophia. It was buried in you by the powers of the flawed world to keep it hidden and asleep. But it is there. It is what is deepest and truest in you. It is not a metaphor in the Gnostic vision. It is a literal fragment of the highest reality, trapped in the lowest, waiting to be remembered and gathered home. And think about what this says about your own worth, because it cuts against so much of what the world and much of religion has told you about yourself. You have likely been taught, in one way or another, that you are fundamentally lacking, sinful, broken, unworthy, a creature who must earn or beg its way toward a distant good. The teaching of the spark says something almost shockingly different. It says that at the very centre of you, beneath everything, there is not a flaw but a treasure, not a stain but a light, not something to be ashamed of but the most precious thing in all of creation, an actual fragment of the true and infinite source, the very substance of the fullness, hidden in you like a jewel buried in a field. The powers of the world the Gnostics believed work constantly to keep you from knowing this, because a person who knew there was a fragment of God at the centre of themselves would be impossible to fully enslave. So the world teaches you that you are worthless, or guilty, or small, precisely because the truth is the opposite, and the truth is dangerous. You are not, at the core, a worthless thing that must become worthy. You are a piece of the light that has forgotten what it is. And all of the spiritual work is not adding something you lack, but uncovering something you already, always are. And notice too that this reframes the whole meaning of your longing for the light. If the spark in you is a fragment of Sophia, then that longing is not a sign of your deficiency, it is a sign of your origin. The homesickness is the fragment recognizing that it does not belong to the darkness it fell into. A stone feels no homesickness for the sky, because it never came from there. You ache for the light, because you came from the light. The very capacity to long for the source is the proof that the source is in you. Your longing is not evidence that something is missing. It is evidence that something is present. The spark, remembering, reaching, calling, exactly as Sophia calls from the depths, because it is Sophia, in you, calling still. And you see what this means about you, and about Sophia. and about the two of you together, it means you are not a stranger to her story. You are inside it. The light in you is her light, the fragment that fell, the piece of the fullness that scattered into the world. Your deepest self and Sophia's lost light are the same thing. And that means her longing is your longing. That homesickness you have felt, the ache for a home you cannot name, the sense that you belong somewhere higher and purer than this world, that is not only yours, it is Sophia's longing, still alive in the fragment of her that is in you, still reaching from the depths of the world back toward the source it fell from. When you long for the light, it is the light in you longing for itself. When you reach for the source, it is Sophia, in you, reaching still. And here is the most beautiful turn of all, the thing that makes this whole ancient story land with such force. Sophia's restoration and your awakening are the same event. She cannot be made fully whole until her scattered light is gathered home, and her scattered light includes the spark in you. Which means that when you wake, when the light in you remembers what it is and turns back toward the source, you are not only saving yourself, you are participating in the healing of Sophia herself, and through her, in the mending of the whole flawed world. Every spark that wakes and rises is a fragment of Sophia coming home. Every soul that remembers the light is part of wisdom being restored. The Gnostics believed the entire cosmos was, in the end, one long process of the fallen light being gathered back, Sophia being made whole again, spark by spark, soul by soul, until the deficiency is corrected, and the light is complete, and the mistake, at last, is undone. And you are part of that. Your own awakening is a stitch in the healing of a wound as old as the world. Sit with that dignity, that meaning. Before we go on, now let us ask why a story this luminous was buried and lost. There is something we have not yet said plainly about Sophia, and it is one of the most important things about her, and it is part of why her story was both so powerful and so threatening. Sophia is a she. The being whose reaching made the world, whose grief became its substance, whose longing lives in the depths of everything, the central figure of this entire cosmic drama is feminine. And that is not an accident, and it did not come from nowhere. It reaches back into the oldest layers of the tradition. Long before the Gnostics, in the wisdom literature of the Hebrew scriptures, wisdom was already personified as a woman. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom, Chokmah in Hebrew, Sophia, when translated into Greek, speaks in her own voice and calls out in the streets, and describes herself in the most extraordinary terms. She says that she was there at the very beginning, that the source possessed her at the start of his ways, before the world was made, that she was beside him as the world was formed, like a master craftsman, like a little child, rejoicing before him, delighting in the world as it came to be. Here, in the heart of the scriptures that everyone knew, was a feminine figure called Wisdom, present at creation, intimately involved in the making of the world, a companion of the divine from before the beginning. The Gnostics did not invent Sophia out of nothing. They took this ancient figure of wisdom as woman, present at creation, and they told a deeper, stranger, more tragic story about what her role in creation really was. And this connects to something the Gnostics felt strongly, which was that the divine has a feminine dimension that the religion around them had increasingly buried. In the secret book of John, the very first emanation from the source is often a feminine figure, the mother, the womb of the all, the first thought. The divine in the Gnostic vision is not simply a father, it is father and mother both, source and womb, and the feminine is woven into the highest reaches of the light. Even the spirit, and this is a genuine strand in the earliest layers of the tradition, because the word for spirit is feminine in the Semitic languages, was sometimes understood in feminine terms, as a mother. There is an early tradition in which the teacher speaks of the Holy Spirit as his mother. The Gnostics inherited and amplified this. For them, the divine feminine was not a minor decoration, it was central. The mother above, and Sophia her fallen aspect, and the light that must be gathered home, the whole drama has a feminine figure at its heart. Sit with why this mattered, and why it made the story dangerous. In a religious world that was steadily narrowing the divine to a single masculine ruler, and steadily narrowing the roles of women in its communities, here was a tradition that placed a feminine figure, wisdom, Sophia the mother, at the very centre of the cosmic story, as the one whose reaching shaped the world and whose restoration is the goal of everything. A tradition in which the deepest disciple is a woman, Mary, and the central cosmic figure is a woman, Sophia, and the divine itself has a mother as well as a father. You can feel how such a vision would sit against the grain of an institution moving in the opposite direction. The burial of Sophia's story is, in part, the burial of the feminine face of God, the long forgetting of the she of the divine, the wisdom who was there at the beginning, rejoicing before the source, delighting in the world. And when we recover her story now, we are recovering not only a cosmology, but a whole dimension of the divine that was almost lost, which brings us directly to the question of why it was lost at all. The story of Sophia is not in any Bible. It was not taught in the churches that grew and spread. It was labelled heresy, and its texts were left uncopied, and it faded so completely that for most of history it was known only through the writings of the men who attacked it, until the buried copies began to surface from the sands of Egypt in our own age. Why? Why was a story this profound, this beautiful, this searching, set aside and nearly erased? There are several reasons, and they braid together. The first is the one we have already touched. This story says that the maker of the world is not the true God. That is the single most explosive claim in all of Gnosticism, and it could not coexist with the religion that was becoming orthodox. If the God who made the world, the God who says I am God and there is no other, is in fact a flawed and blind lower power, then the entire foundation of a religion built on worshipping the Creator as the supreme God is pulled out from under it. This was not a small disagreement about details, it was a fundamental split about the very identity of God, and the side that won could not tolerate a story that made its God into Yaldabaoth. So the story had to go. The second reason is the feminine at the centre, which we just explored. A cosmology in which a female figure's reaching shapes the world, and a female figure's restoration is the goal of history, and the divine itself has a mother. This did not fit an institution that was closing its offices to women and narrowing its God to a single masculine ruler. Sophia was inconvenient in the same way Mary was inconvenient. The feminine divine and the female spiritual authority that went with it were being written out of the tradition, and Sophia's story was written out along with them. The third reason is subtler, and it is about the kind of religion the Gnostic story implied. If the world is a flawed copy made by a blind God, and the true source is beyond it, and salvation comes through gnosis, through the inner awakening of the spark, the light remembering itself, then the whole apparatus of external religion becomes secondary. What you need is not obedience to the world's ruler, not sacrifices to the Creator, not the mediation of an institution, but the inner knowledge that awakens the spark and gathers the light home. This is a deeply interior, deeply individual vision of salvation. And while it did not necessarily reject community, it did make the institution non-essential in a way that institutions rarely tolerate. A story that locates salvation in the awakening of the light within, rather than in the structures without, is a story that quietly makes the structures optional. And so, once again, the story faded, not because it was refuted, but because it was dangerous to the shape the tradition was taking. And it is worth saying, carefully and fairly, that the side that won did not necessarily win because it was cynical or corrupt. History is rarely that simple. The tradition that became orthodox had its own real concerns for unity, for a shared story that could hold a growing community together, for a God who was the good creator of a world that could be affirmed rather than rejected. There were sincere people on that side too, who genuinely believed the Gnostic vision was mistaken, that it slandered the creator, that it was too pessimistic about the world and the body, too individualistic, too easily twisted. We do not have to demonize the winners to mourn what was lost. But we should be clear-eyed about the consequence, whatever the motives, an entire vision of the divine, feminine as well as masculine, a God beyond this flawed world, a salvation that came through inner awakening, was pushed to the margins and very nearly erased, and for most of history no one even knew it had existed. Whether or not the Gnostics were right about everything, the world was made poorer by losing the ability to even hear them. And that is why recovering these texts now matters, not to declare a winner in an ancient fight, but to restore a voice to the conversation that was silenced before it could finish speaking. So put the three together. A story that dethrones the creator, that centers the feminine divine, and that makes salvation inward and the institution optional, and you can feel why it did not survive in the open. It was too destabilizing on too many fronts at once. And yet, it did not entirely die. It was buried. And it waited, patient as Sophia herself in her long exile, for the day it would be found and read again. And now that you have heard it, the real question is not the historical one. It is the personal one. The one Sophia's whole story has been quietly building toward. What does her story ask of you? Sophia's whole story turns on a single distinction, and once you see it, you find it running through the whole of your own life. It is the difference between two kinds of reaching. There is the reaching that grasps, solitary, impatient, out of harmony, trying to seize what it wants by force of will, alone. And there is the reaching that receives, patient, in relationship, in harmony with the whole, opening to what it longs for rather than snatching at it. Sophia fell by the first kind of reaching. She was restored and finally given the very knowledge she wanted through the second. And the Gnostics believed that this is the deepest practical wisdom there is, applicable to every longing you will ever have. Think about how much of human sorrow comes from the first kind of reaching. We want love, and we grasp at it, and the grasping drives it away. We want peace, and we chase it frantically, and the chasing destroys it. We want understanding or meaning, or the sense of the sacred, and we try to seize it by force, alone, on our own terms, right now, and it slips through our fingers, or worse. We break the very thing we were reaching through. The grasping reach is the one that says, I will have this, myself, now, by my own power, and it is precisely the reach that shatters. Sophia's fall is the cosmic archetype of every time a good longing, pursued by grasping, has broken something. And the second reach, the receiving reach, is the one Sophia learns, and the one her story teaches you. It is the reach that turns toward what it longs for, and then opens, and waits, and lets it come. It is the reach that seeks in harmony rather than in isolation, that is willing to receive the beloved thing as a gift rather than seize it as a possession. It is the difference between clutching and opening, between demanding and welcoming, between the closed fist and the open hand. And the extraordinary promise of Sophia's story is that the receiving reach actually works, that Sophia, in the end, is given the very knowledge of the source she once fell trying to grasp, because she stopped grasping and learnt to receive. The highest things, the Gnostics believed, will never be seized, but they will in time be given to the one who turns and opens and is made ready. So here is the first thing Sophia's story asks of you, to notice, in your own reaching, which kind it is. When you long for something, love, peace, meaning, the light itself, notice whether you are grasping or receiving. Notice the closed fist of the grasping reach, and the way it breaks what it grabs. And practice, gently, the open hand of the receiving reach, the turning toward, the opening, the willingness to wait and to be given rather than to seize. This is not passivity. Sophia's longing was not wrong, it was the way of her longing that fell. You are not asked to stop longing for the deepest things. You are asked to long for them the other way, with an open hand. That single shift, from grasping to receiving, is the whole difference between the fall and the restoration, lived out in your own heart. And it leads directly to the second thing her story asks of you, which is what to do when you have already fallen. Because you have. We all have. Let us speak of the turning. You have made Sophia's mistake. Not the cosmic one, you did not make a world, but the human form of it, many times. You have reached wrongly. You have grasped at good things and broken them. You have acted alone, out of order, out of an impatient longing, and brought forth consequences you did not intend and could not take back. You have, like Sophia, made messes out of love. Everyone has. It is the most human thing there is. So the deepest question Sophia's story puts to you is not whether you have fallen. It is what you will do now that you have. And her story gives a very clear answer, and it is the most hopeful thing in the whole myth. What Sophia did after her fall was this. First she hid, in shame, and that changed nothing, and only let the mistake grow. And then she stopped hiding. She faced what she had done. She grieved it honestly. And she turned away from the concealment, turned back toward the light she had fallen from, and cried out. And that turning was the hinge on which her whole restoration swung. Not the hiding, the turning. The moment she stopped concealing her mistake and turned back toward the source was the moment the source could begin to lift her home. This is the pattern the Gnostics believed applies to every soul that has fallen, which is every soul there is. The way back does not begin with fixing the mistake or undoing the damage or proving you are worthy again. It begins with turning, with stopping the hiding, with facing what you have done honestly enough to grieve it, and then turning your face back toward the light. And here is the mercy at the centre of it, the same mercy the whole story has been teaching. The light does not wait for you to climb all the way back on your own. The moment you turn, it moves toward you. Sophia did not haul herself back up to the fullness by her own strength. She turned and grieved and cried out, and the whole light turned toward her and lifted her. The turning is your part. The lifting is done by the light. All you have to do is stop hiding and turn. Sit with how gentle that is, and how it removes the crushing weight so many people carry. You do not have to earn your way back from your falls by some impossible labour of self-perfection. You have to turn. You have to stop hiding the mistake in shame, face it, grieve it truly, and turn your face back toward the light, and then let yourself be lifted. That is what Sophia did. That is what her story asks of you. and it is available in this very moment, tonight. With whatever fall you are carrying, whatever mistake of love or longing has been sitting in you in shame, you can turn. You can stop hiding it. You can grieve it and face the light, and the light the Gnostics promised is already turning toward you, has never stopped, is only waiting for you to turn so that it can begin to lift you home. Now, having walked through the whole of Sophia's story, her longing, her mistake, her grief, her rescue, and what it asks of you, we are ready for the deepest thing of all. Let us name what Sophia's story was really telling us, so let us say it plainly, now that we have walked the whole of it. I promised you at the beginning that the final revelation would not be that a flawed world was born from a mistake. Here it is. The final revelation is that Sophia is not an ancient goddess in a story that happened once, long ago, at the beginning of the world. Sophia is you. Her story is not history. It is a pattern, the pattern of your own soul, being told on the scale of the cosmos so that you could finally see it. Look at what her story actually is, and then look at your own life. A being of light at the edge of a great home is seized by a longing to reach the source directly. She reaches, alone, out of harmony, grasping, and she falls. Her reaching brings forth something flawed. She is filled with shame, and she hides. And then, in her grief, she stops hiding, and turns and cries out toward the light she fell from, and the light which never abandoned her moves to lift her home, and gives her freely the very thing she once fell trying to seize. That is not only the story of the world, that is the story of a human life. Your life. You came from somewhere luminous. You have a longing in you for the source that you cannot explain and cannot silence. You have reached for it, and for 100 other good things, by grasping, and you have fallen, and made messes out of love, and hidden them in shame. And the whole question of your existence is whether you will do what Sophia finally did. Stop hiding, turn, grieve, and let the light lift you home. And here is why it can be told as one story on two scales at once. Because the light in you is Sophia's light. Her fall scattered her divine substance into the world, and a fragment of it is the spark at the centre of you. So when you feel the longing, it is her longing. When you fall by grasping, you are repeating her fall. When you hide in shame, you are doing what she did. And when you finally turn back toward the light, you are not only saving yourself, you are Sophia. Turning, you are wisdom. Coming home, you are a fragment of the fallen light being gathered back, which is the very thing her restoration requires. Your awakening and her restoration are the same event, seen small and seen large. Every soul that turns toward the light is wisdom being made whole. Every spark that remembers is the mistake being undone, one fragment at a time. And there is a staggering dignity in this that I do not want you to miss, because it changes what your small, private, inner life actually means. We tend to think of our own spiritual struggles as tiny and insignificant, a person alone, in the dark, trying to turn toward something better. Small stuff against the vastness of the cosmos. But if Sophia's story is true, then nothing could be further from the truth. Your quiet, inward turning toward the light is not small at all. It is a cosmic event. It is a fragment of fallen wisdom being gathered home. It is the healing of a wound as old as the world, advancing by one stitch. When you, alone, in the night, turn your heart back toward the source, when the spark in you remembers, even for a moment what it is, The entire cosmos is, in that instant, a little more whole than it was. Sophia is a little more restored. The scattered light is a little more gathered. Your private awakening ripples out into the healing of everything, because your private awakening is part of the healing of everything. There is no such thing, in this vision, as a merely personal salvation. Every soul that comes home brings a piece of wisdom with it, and wisdom cannot be whole until they all come home. Your turning matters more than you have ever dared to imagine. That is why this story is, in the end, not a tragedy but a promise. It begins with a fall, and it ends with a homecoming. It begins with a mistake, and it ends with a mending. And it tells you that the flaw in the world and the flaw in you are not crimes to be punished, but wounds to be healed. Wounds that came from love reaching too far, and that are healed by love turning back. The world is not a courtroom. It is Sophia's long journey home, and you are walking it with her, in her, as her. And the ending is not in doubt. The light will be gathered, wisdom will be restored, the deficiency will be corrected, and the mistake undone, and the fallen light brought all the way home. The only question the story leaves open is when you, the fragment of her that is reading this, will turn. You are not a guilty thing in a world you spoiled. You are fallen light, longing for home, being gently gathered back. You are Sophia's mistake, yes, but you are also Sophia's homecoming. And which of those you are tonight is decided by nothing more than the direction you turn. So let me leave you with what Sophia learned to carry down into sleep. Not a guilt, a homecoming. If it is true that the light in you is a fragment of wisdom herself, fallen and longing and waiting to be gathered home, then the whole of the path comes down to one quiet movement, the one that turned her whole story around. Turning, not grasping harder at the light, but turning toward it and opening. Not hiding your falls in shame, but facing them, grieving them honestly and turning your face back toward the source. You will forget and grasp again and hide again. That is the way of it, for everyone, even for wisdom herself. But every time you turn back, the light moves toward you, and it has never once stopped waiting. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, do only this. Let the grasping quiet, let the shame of whatever you are carrying loosen its grip, and simply turn, inwardly, gently toward the light you came from, the source your deepest self has never stopped longing for. You do not have to reach it. You do not have to seize it. You have only to turn toward it, and open like Sophia in her grief, and let yourself begin to be lifted. That turning is the whole of it. That turning is wisdom coming home. And you are already, in that quiet turning, on your way. If Sophia's story meant something to you, and you want to keep walking through the texts the Church has left behind, subscribe and stay with me, because there is far more still buried, and we will keep opening it, one lost story at a time. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, and whether you have ever felt that longing for a home you cannot name, the longing that perhaps was never only yours, and everything I have gathered on these forgotten texts, drawn together in one place, is waiting for you in the Hidden Light collection. The link is below. Next time, we go looking for the light itself, the divine spark the Gnostics called the monad, hidden inside you, the very fragment of Sophia we spoke of tonight, where the texts say it came from, why the rulers buried it so deep, and what happens in a human being the moment it finally wakes. That is where we go next. Until then, rest well and turn, even now as your eyes begin to close, toward the light you came from, and stay awake.